Hello, friends. Me again. Daimoku Sancho, please. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. All right. And immediately itchy nose. All right, so I've created several series on different sutras, mainly Mahayana sutras, and culminated that in a way by spending some time discussing the Lotus Sutra, not only what its amazing insights it provided, but also its location within the history and teaching path of Buddhist practice. It's kind of an epilogue to all of the previous 40-some years of Shakyamuni's teachings. Anyway, don't want to repeat myself too much. You want more on that, please go watch those videos. I'm going to wipe the lens here because I see dust on it. Okay, so I want to talk to all of you, but some of this is going to be not directed at, but inclusive especially of those of you who have either studied under a Nichiren sect or lay organization, or who have come to Nichiren on your own. And don't worry if you haven't, or if you're in a different place in your Buddhist practice. My mission, my goal in all of this is to try to, I don't want to use the word demystify, but mysticism in the fact that, well, I'll just go ahead and start and you'll understand. What I want to do is teach Buddhism as Shakyamuni did, broadly. Everybody has a different starting point. And sometimes being thrown in the middle of it, you don't understand, or you don't see, or it isn't made obvious to you where you are in the teachings, and that there are things that what you're reading are definitely planned on leading to, while in other cases what you're reading is, as an epilogue, may contain a lot of information, but it's built on the shoulders of many previous teachings. So if you don't investigate those, you're left kind of just accepting things in rhetoric without really understanding what they mean. So this is why I'm here. This is my whole purpose in my Bodhisattva practice, is to try to link this stuff up so you can see the tremendous consistency and the development of thought that gets us to the most simple, efficacious, and culminating teaching that Shakyamuni was trying to get to from the get-go. Remember, it's a very simple thing. Shakyamuni's question before he became enlightened as Siddhartha Gautama was, how can we live life without all of these disappointments and illnesses and weakness and uncontrollable emotions and attachments and all this stuff? Well, how can we live life, which is so gorgeous, so beautiful, so precious, so amazing, without being tortured with all this other stuff? It's just seems to me unnecessary. There must be a way, spiritually, remember spiritual as in the mind, to remove ourselves, to free ourselves from whatever it is that causes this suffering to arise in our lives. Okay? And he spends a lot of time having to teach the mechanisms of the mind and how the mind works with the body and how the mind creates its own environments and so on and so forth, till he can finally get to the point where, okay, now all you need to do is this. It's really It's really, really simple. You just have to know how to think this particular way, and that will provide you the bliss of life. But as simple as it sounds, it's a tall order. And I'm reminded, little anecdote for you guys, when I was young, yes, there was a time when I was young, I used to buy record albums. I was really into music. I was a shy kid, and I didn't have many friends, and so music was my ally through youth. I don't think that's a singular story. I think a lot of you, maybe all of us, go through something of that nature. My point is, when I was a kid, albums came in very large cardboard envelopes, some with folded as larger envelopes, folded in half to fit this 12-inch round disc in it. And there was a lot of information provided on all that paper. Even in CDs, if you didn't start collecting music until the CD era, excuse me, even then, a lot of CDs would come with little pamphlets in them and a lot of information about the band, their performances, who played what instruments, and oftentimes, as in the larger albums, you would discover not only how your favorite musicians appeared, what they looked like, but they didn't just play one instrument. And that's part of the education around your musical tastes, was part of what hooked you into music in the first place. So I miss those days. MP3s don't give you anything like that. But my point is, what I would do, and I would suspect many people did, is that there was a record or a song that really attracted me. I'd find out the band, and then I would look on the liner notes and on the back, whatever, where they talked about the musicians, and you know, I would notice, I would become critical in that the thing that really hooked me about this particular band wasn't, you know, the feature artist so much as it was the bass player. Played some licks that just blew my mind. I thought, who is that? Who's the bass player? And then I would find out, and I would say, well, maybe that bass player put out his own albums, either on his own or with other bands. Let me look him up or her up. And that would lead me to expanding my knowledge of music. And then I would notice, like a lot of music from different bands that I would enjoy shared certain musicians. This was more true of the, there's all kinds of different labels, especially back then for it. You know, people think about jazz as New Orleans jazz, very straight up jazz, but there was a period in the 70s and 80s, and even today, but it's called different things. There was new jazz, there was fusion jazz, there was improvisational jazz, there was, all kinds of things. I moved more into that alternative space, and that's where a lot of musicians just would get together as a group, put out an album, label it, we're so-and-so, and then they would shift and the other members would move along. They would move to other, maybe they moved to Germany where they got a lot of popular support, but not all of them, so they grabbed other musicians from other countries, and they'd put out an album or two. So you really kind of had to track your musicians rather than the band by name. And then there, of course, there were the stalwart bands, you know, like Led Zeppelin and others, you know, that where you knew what you were getting into. You knew the people and everything, and what you looked for was what new things are they going to do on this next record. It's also not something you see a lot of today in the music industry. Anyway, that anecdote is, it's a reminder for you. Because here's the scenario that I'm going to address or start to address in this video. If you are a student of Nichiren and you become a student of Nichiren or any other sect, but certainly in our modern world, and my own exposure to Nichiren sects and lay organizations, is there is a tendency, and this has happened throughout the history of Buddhism, but this is current and this is why I'm talking about, that they limit their study and their talks and their entire sphere of Buddhism to the writings of Nichiren. And it's ironic, actually, because Nichiren was a Lotus school scholar. But he was a scholar of Buddhism. And the Lotus just happened in his studies all over China and the Asian continent and Japan, and that the Lotus Sutra obviously became prominent. And we learn of this not from the Lotus Sutra, not from Tendai, not from Nagarjuna, not from Vasubandhu, not from many names, Dengyo, that might be familiar to you as a Nichiren member. But they're only familiar to you through the writings of Nichiren. And so now think of the record album in the big container. You might love Romantic Warrior, an album by Chick Corea and friends. Great pianist, although you wouldn't know that until you read the liner notes. Because there's a lot of other instruments going on that album, that record. And then you might have read that record and you would have read Stanley Clarke as the bassist. And you would know Stanley Clarke because you know Romantic Warrior, and you think you have some inkling of who Chick Corea is. But I want you to go a step further, and this is what the sects and lay organizations of any sect don't seem to resist, although it was a very strong exhortation from Shakyamuni Buddha himself that all his students, all students of Buddhism, should study broadly. In fact, so broadly, not only all of the Buddhist sutras and commentaries, but the non-Buddhist ones as well. So, in that spirit, and as Shakyamuni also exhorted, practice like me, I'm doing my best to do so, and I find that through that effort, I'm getting a much richer, much more logical, much more usable knowledge of Buddhism in my life and what it means to practice. Okay? So Nichiren school teaching is like a really great album that I love. But when Nichiren mentions Stanley Clarke as the bassist, I go and research Stanley Clarke. Because if he was good enough and had important things to say that Nichiren's willing to quote, then maybe he stands on his own as having a different avenue of understanding into this great thing we call Buddhist practice. And then I'll understand better what Nichiren means when he cites him. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is what I'm trying to do, and this is what I did, obviously, in the Lotus Sutra series, in order to define its place in our learning. Because I put it to you that teaching never really happens from sharing of information from an authoritarian figure to a disciple or student. Teaching happens in the student. You decide what you're going to cultivate from what you read, hear, experience. So we call it learning, but in truth it's self-teaching. And the person who stands up there is fooling themselves if they think they're authoritarian. I don't think I'm authoritarian. I think I'm a facilitator. I'm a bodhisattva. I'm only trying to steer you toward correct information and to expand your idea of how you look at it so that I give you tools to better understand and to investigate for yourself. Teach yourself. Where do you start? Let me help you with that. Let me show you some things. Let me ask some questions that you might have to then go, wait a minute, what is he saying? And go search it out. But when you search it out, like I did with the Vimalakirti and the Lankavatara and other sutras that I've talked about, don't just read it, but understand what you're reading. Understand the way the message is being delivered. Try to get beneath the words and get the meaning. Not only the meaning, but the way it's taught is part of the meaning, because it's taught to a certain group of individuals who are capable of only thinking a certain way. And so they have to be reached in a specific manner. This is in Buddhism called skillful means. Sometimes you make up stories and analogies that have nothing to do with Buddhism, but they're little ethical plays, little moralistic plays, or little thought experiments to get the student to go, oh, I get what you're saying. I know what you mean now. So you can't take the teachings literally as writ. You have to understand the audience, the teacher, and the subject. And my contention to you, or my proposal to you, not contention, my proposal to you is that this becomes much easier the broader your study, because you start to see the patterns. You start to expunge the flowery or setup and cultivate the meaning, the core, that this is what this is about. All right? And I think if you're only reading Nichiren, you're going to either have to be an exceptional mind that can perceive what isn't there through the few words that are, not that there are few words, or you're going to be desperately stuck. It's going to, and this is my greatest fear. Anyone who studies Buddhism, who starts to feel like these are just things I have to believe, or I take for granted, or I just do this, is going to miss the tremendous richness. And I mean richness in that, in your own gut, that you're going to be able to develop from finding the meaning in all of these words. That's what motivates me every morning when I get up, okay? So, for instance, my subject is going to be about something I hear constant complaints from myself and from other, and scholars as well, some of whom haven't studied and read in Buddhism at all, but find themselves in a term paper or to get a degree in a scholastic endeavor, that when they study the Lotus Sutra, there seems to be no answer. There's no how-to. There's only this description of, how wonderful it is to do this, how wonderful it is to practice, how this medicine is better than all other medicines, and all this. See, all they see is the words. But in point of fact, it isn't the mission of the Lotus Sutra to teach you how to meditate. It isn't even Nichiren's focus. So if you come into Buddhism and you hear, oh, it's all about meditation and how to meditate, how to right your mind, and you read Nichiren and you read the Lotus Sutra, which is actually extra if you're a Nichiren follower, you're going to be confused. You're going to, well, I guess I just have to take this for granted. Now, for a lot of people, that works. Authoritarianism has been inculcated into our cultures for centuries. Some might say millennia. It's just very hard to break away from that. But my proposal says you're only getting, it's the iceberg analogy again. You're getting useful thoughts, but there's very little depth to them. There's an amazing depth that will surprise you, put you in awe, and motivate you in this practice when you look at the rest of the iceberg, what's underneath the surface, okay? So as an example, I'm going to start this video and probably a short series because I can't fit it all in less than an hour. I want to talk about the meditation itself. And when I do, I hope that what pops up for you is, oh, now I understand why Nichiren does this. Or now I understand Nichiren Buddhism. Or now I understand what enlightenment is about. Or what my brain should be doing when I'm meditating. Nobody seems to be able to tell me that. Or they'll tell you, like certain lay organizations do, use it like a wishing duel, like Nichiren says, earthly desires are enlightenment. He only said that to give people who are greedy, and we all are, but who are stuck in something of greed, like they want a lover, or they want a new car, or they're scared they're going to lose their job. The world of desires. Nichiren turns it on his head and says, take that to the Gohonzon and chant. But that's not all of Buddhism. For some people who practice Nichiren, that's it. It's a wishing jewel. Anytime you want something, go chant for it. That's very, very perverted. And worse, it's a very small and short-sighted understanding of what you're actually doing. Even in Nichiren's terms, if all you study is that, what he's trying to point out is that any challenges you have in life, you take to Gohonzon and chant, because it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what you think you want in this human samsaric world of attachments. You can chant for a Camaro all day long, but he understands that that's a trick. Because once you sit down in front of Gohonzon and start to chant, you're going right past that world of desire. You're going right through all of those petty little attachments that you feel so strongly about. You're going right through all of that directly to your Buddha nature. And so what you're doing when you chant in front of Gohonzon, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, is you're saying, hello Buddha nature. Talk to me, show me how beautiful the world is without all of these attachments. Show me how wonderful and precious my life is, and all the while you're saying, show me and give me this, you're talking to yourself. Because that Buddha nature isn't in the scroll. It's not in the characters all over the place, in the story of the Lotus Sutra. It's a mirror. It's a mirror that's reflecting what? It's reflecting your Buddha nature, your Buddha mind. You're just so deluded by earthly desires that you don't understand it. You don't see it. You don't experience it. But Nichiren knows. Nichiren knows if you go to that perfect mirror of your Buddha nature, that when you chant, even though in your human mind you're all, I'm going to get something, I'm going to get this, like praying, which is why I don't like using that word, because it's an expectation to get something from nothing. Something earthly, something that has no permanent existence, to satiate desires that are nothing but delusion. When you chant and invoke the teachings of Shakyamuni, all of that stuff is just, it's clutter. And the more you chant, the more that clutter fades and goes away. And if you chant for 30 minutes, an hour, it doesn't matter that your motivation was to get a date with that lovely blonde you met, or if you're a woman with that handsome dude, or new kitchen appliances. Whatever motivates you, it does not matter. Because your chanting is awakening your deepest mind, which is unattached. And so when you come out of that, you're going to have to actually put some effort into reminding yourself what you were chanting about, or you're not going to feel that relationship, that attachment that you so much drove you to chant. You may even ask yourself, or you may still be thinking about it in your human mind, but you will think differently about it. And when you meet that person of your desires or whatever, you'll speak to them without the onus of all that pressure, and it may actually happen. But it won't happen because you prayed for it. It won't happen because something magical happened. If there was magic at all, it was that you changed. And your change was your samsaric human mind got somewhat clarified, purified. And you may find that instead of getting what you want, you get 10 times other things. And you forget all about what it was that you wanted, because now you're living much better. Don't forget to watch those things, because that's actual proof. That's proof in your human experience that connecting with your Buddha mind actually improves and clarifies your human existence. Isn't that the goal that Shakyamuni set out to do? He's removing sufferings. Not he, it, not even it, but the mind of. Okay? So, let's talk about that a little bit. Way back in Hinayana, and here's a translation from the Pali on Samadhi Sutta by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, and he's talking about the eighth of the Eight Noble Paths, proper samadhi, right meditation, right. Let's not call it meditation, because what it really is the right state of mind in meditation. That's probably what I'll call this series, is the mind of meditation. And I'll just read you the first part here, because I want to show you this thread. This isn't anything new in Buddhism. Nichiren didn't invent this. That's also why he doesn't describe it, right? And the Lotus Sutra doesn't really describe it. But I'm going to read something for you and show it to you. Not the whole thing, but enough of it to make my point, and hopefully to inspire you to research, to study. That's the first parameter. You cannot chant, meditate, think about, consider, contemplate, understand what you're doing if you don't first read the book, read the directions. Then you'll know how to put the IKEA furniture together. Don't just look at the mess on the floor and start putting stuff together. Some people can do that. Some people have a very physical awareness brain. But even they will occasionally reference the instructions. You have to pay homage to the people who took the time to instruct, who worked with the designers and the people who put it together in the factory to accomplish a method. And Buddhism is a method. So here's way back in Hinayana. Wise and mindful, you should develop immeasurable concentration. Concentration based on immeasurable goodwill, compassion, appreciation, or equanimity. When wise and mindful, one has developed immeasurable concentration, 5 realizations arise right within oneself. Which 5? Right within oneself is right out of the Eight Noble Path, right? Right views, right conduct, right samadhi. So here it is. This would be very early teachings, right? The realization arises right within oneself that, quote, this concentration is blissful in the present and will result in bliss in the future. Second, this realization arises right within oneself that, quote, this concentration is noble and not connected with the baits of the flesh. Do I need to explain that? The baits of the flesh, our preoccupations with immediate gratification in this samsaric reality, this condition, this human condition. So the very second is the concentration is noble, and not connected with the baits of the flesh. What's noble? The Eightfold Path. What's noble about the Eightfold Path? It's a practice in daily life to achieve the Four Noble Truths. Noble truth is that suffering is caused by attachments. Attachments arise because of cravings. To end cravings is the answer to a blissful life. Okay? Next realization, right within oneself, this concentration is not obtained by base people. Base people. Kind of a, I don't know. We have a lot of problems with interhuman politics in our current social cultures in the world, especially United States, where everything is a slight. Everything is a personal attack. Get over yourself. If you're somebody who's just constantly shunning information, shunning study, and you just like to exist from moment to moment in some manufactured, I don't know. Anyway, you know what base people are. The realization arises within oneself, blah, blah, blah. This concentration is peaceful, exquisite, the acquiring of serenity, the attainment of unity, not kept in place by the fabrications of forceful restraint. Not forceful restraint from the police or the militia or your peer group. The forceful restraint is something you in your own mind have to keep yourself from doing. No, don't eat that third chunk of cake. That's forceful restraint. Well, you can attain the serenity, attainment of unity without having to use that kind of restraint. The next one, I enter into this concentration mindfully, and mindfully I emerge from it. Wise and mindful, you should develop immeasurable concentration. When wise and mindful, one has developed immeasurable concentration. These 5 realizations arise right within oneself. Okay, so why do I read this? This is very early teachings on samadhi, and there's more. It gets into more nitty-gritty in here, and I'm not sure if I posted this on my resource site or not. If not, I'll check, and I will. What I know I posted on the site, and you can go to threefoldlotus.com, and you can find these under the core study materials. What I do is I sometimes take excerpts from different texts, different sources, different scholarship, to prepare for these videos, and I study them, and I study their background and so forth. And if I think, well, I don't want to make a video that has no merit, but that merit is based on research, and so I try to share at least a good measure of the research that brought me to the desire to do the video, and I put that online. And so that list of green buttons that I have there with subtitles for each of these documents, I try to make them obvious. That list of buttons that link you to PDFs that you can print out of these study materials is on my website, so that after you watch the video, or if you get bored in the middle of it, or whatever, you can go to threefoldlotus.com, go to the core study materials link, and then pick and choose, as you can on my video channel on YouTube, pick and choose subject matter and either watch the video or then go read some documentation on the research. Sometimes the research is kind of all over the place, but it's still based on that subject. Maybe you read that first and then watch the video, do both, whatever. But these two, I definitely posted online. This one, now see, that was early Pali, all right? And now I'm going to read you the closing sutra of the Lotus Sutra. I practice what's called the Threefold Lotus Sutra. So there's an opening sutra, the immeasurable means. sutra, which is like 3 chapters, and that's the sutra that talks about, in the 42 years that I've taught, I have not yet revealed the truth. What the heck did he mean by that? Well, again, studying broadly, you understand what that meant. But that's not the Lotus Sutra. That's the introduction to the Lotus Sutra. All right? It's considered part of the Lotus Sutra teaching, but if you're not exposed to that, you're going to miss some very important assertions of Shakyamuni's that you're going to read about in Nichiren's writings, but you won't be able to find it in the Lotus Sutra, and then that'll create doubt, or you'll wonder what's going on. You have to study broadly, okay? The same is true to all of those people who've told me that, or who I've read about, scholars who I've read about, who say the Lotus Sutra has nothing about method in it. Well, first of all, because that's not the purpose of the Lotus Sutra. And secondly, you didn't read the closing sutra. The 28th chapter of the Lotus Sutra is about Bodhisattva Universal Worthy and his merits. But the very next chapter, which isn't the Lotus Sutra, but the epilogue or the closing sutra, is how to practice meditation on the Bodhisattva Universal Worthy. Ah, look, a whole sutra on how to meditate. So yeah, there is information in the Lotus Sutra on how to meditate. You just didn't read it because you didn't bother with the closing sutra. So this one's interesting because not only does it have information on, remember, all of the previous teachings to the Lotus Sutra are constantly about the mind, what the position, what the thinking, what the mindset needs to work toward, what it needs to be in order to have effective what? Meditation, concentration, contemplation, chanting, whatever you want to call it. Once you start to practice and study, the meditation part becomes more and more important, and knowing what your mind should be doing, because we have to train our human minds to be doing in order to aspire to right samadhi, right, that I just read, the 8th of the Eightfold Path. This gets more and more complicated, explanatory. Certainly in the Mahayana Sutras, everything's about explaining the minutiae of what that looks like, sounds like, feels like, how to swim within the meditation so that it is productive, so that it gets you to. And in fact, the meditations are divided into those of Shravakas, disciples, and Pratyeka Buddhas, Arhats, and then finally Bodhisattva. And why is the Bodhisattva Samadhi so much more focused on the attitudes of our perception than maybe some earlier ones are, like this Pali one that's all about peaceful, exquisite, acquiring center. This all sounds like, to a New Ager, like relaxation, letting go. But not so. That's only the beginning. That's only a step. By the time you get to Bodhisattva Samadhi, you're reconsidering reality itself and understanding how to position the mind in order to achieve the Buddha mind goal. It's very hard to describe with words. So here it is, even in the Lotus Sutra, this meditation on Bodhisattva Universal Worthy isn't even the full samadhi, but it is a preparatory condition in meditation to get you there. And so, at one time when the Buddha was a double-storied hall, blah, 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 3 months from now, This is when he announced to the monks that 3 months from now I will enter parinirvana. So this is at the end or following the Lotus Sutra, but before the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which he taught from his deathbed. Ananda gets up and I want to cut through some of the formalities because you know how repetitive it can get. So he's saying, how with the pure everyday eyes they receive from their fathers and mothers at birth, and without cutting off the 5 desires, will they be able to see what lies beyond obstacles? He's talking about meditation and how people can aspire to this bodhisattva mindset of the Buddha way. How can we do that with ordinary human faculties, right? So the Buddha says to Ananda, listen with attention, and consider the matter carefully. In the past, I, the thus come one, on Mount Grarakuta and in other places, have already widely explained in detail the way of the single truth. Now, in this place, for the sake of living beings of ages to come, who wish to practice the unsurpassed law of the great vehicle, and who wish to study the practice of universal worthy and to carry out universal worthy's practice, I will now explain the method that they should hold in mind. Whether you have already seen universal worthy or have not seen him, I will now explain for you the steps to be observed in order to reduce the number of your offenses. Okay, so universal worthy, as you find out about this particular bodhisattva, and I've already explained that these bodhisattvas and deities and other things are just names, characterizations of specific human behaviors. So if you feel, so the perspective here is that by allowing yourself to follow the desires of your human mind and let that lead you through life, you've actually created an offense. But the offense isn't to Shakyamuni. The offense is to your own Buddha nature. Instead of letting your mind and your Buddha mind control your life of exquisite beauty and wonder, you've allowed your baser mind of samsaric human condition to run you around and create false joys and horrible sufferings and so on and so forth. So this is what he means by offenses. Not that you broke any earthly law, but that you're offending your own value. Okay? So, Ananda, the Bodhisattva Universal Worthy, was born in the land pure and wonderful in the east. The characteristics of that land I have already explained in detail in the Miscellaneous Flower Sutra. Now, in this sutra, I will explain the matter in brief. So, once again, how do you read this so you can understand it? He just said the Bodhisattva Universal was born in the land of pure, wonderful east. He's saying you're born of the Buddha mind. You already have the Buddha mind, and yet you allow yourself to be sucked in to the human condition. Okay? So it's in here. You just have to kind of learn how to decipher what's being said. Ananda, if there are monks, nuns, laymen, or lay women, heavenly kings, dragons, other 8 kinds of beings, any living beings who intone the great vehicle. Boom. Boom. Did you hear it? Any living beings who intone the great vehicle, practice the great vehicle, set their minds on the great vehicle, wish to see the form and body of Bodhisattva Universal Worthy, wish to see the Tower of Many Treasures Buddha, wish to see Shakyamuni Buddha and the many Buddhas that are emanations of his body, or wish to attain purification of the 6 sense organs, they should study this meditation. All right. So many answers in that one paragraph. What does intone the great vehicle mean? What do you think it means? if you read the Lotus Sutra at all, and certainly if you read enough Nichiren writings concerning the Lotus Sutra, you will find that the great invention of Nichiren's scholarship was that the title of the Lotus Sutra is not only is it a special set of characters representing the 5 periods of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings, it is also the title of each and every chapter, followed by a subtitle. But that the characters themselves are the teaching. They are, not only are they the teaching, but like the Lotus Sutra, they are the teachings that culminate all of the previous teachings. And you heard this in the earlier statement. The characteristics of that land, that Buddha mind land that we're all born of and then forget when we get here, the characteristics of that land I have already explained in detail in the Miscellaneous Flower Sutra. In essence, he's telling us this teaching is just, it's like a recap of everything I've taught so far. Okay? And so you're not going to get the minutia here. I'm just going to explain the matter in brief, because you already know if you've been following along, right? I'm not going to teach you how to add and subtract while I'm trying to introduce you to the quadratic equation in algebra. If you don't know to plus before you minus, or in plus and minus before you multiply or divide, then, man, you need to go back to square one. I don't want to teach you all that just now, as I'm trying to teach you how the quadratic equation works, right? So here we are at the Lotus Sutra. He's packaging the whole thing and saying, okay, this is it. This is the one vehicle. This is the way to understand all of that stuff I've been telling you. This is what it's about. Okay? And now he's saying it again in the recap, in the epilogue of the Lotus Sutra. And he's saying, intone the great vehicle. What are you intoning? Well, first of all, everything he taught was verbal. So yeah, you could just say, well, intoning means that you're reciting the Lotus Sutra. And you wouldn't be wrong. But in Nichiren's way of thinking, you're intoning the entire Lotus Sutra and everything the Lotus Sutra represents if you chant Myoho Renge Kyo. Myoho Renge Kyo is not only the Lotus Sutra, it is the one vehicle, it is the one law, it is the inclusive teaching of everything Shakyamuni's been teaching his whole life, and culminating with this truth that he tried to teach when he first attained it, but it was too complex and too profound for the people of his time and their capacity to understand, which resulted in all this 58 years of or 50 years of teachings, so he could bring people's capacity up. And he finally, through the Lotus Sutra, teaches not only maybe to the capacity of the people, but understanding that the time may be right for some of them, but that this teaching is for people in the distant future, because at that time, our time now, we are fully capable and able to understand and abstract exactly what this teaching is about and what it means. So, intone the great vehicle must have been a very big clue to Nichiren to say, oh, Myoho Renge Kyo, intone Myoho Renge Kyo. We practice the great vehicle, it's about intoning it. So we set our minds on the great vehicle in meditation, we set our minds to the great vehicle, Myoho Renge Kyo. So Nichiren didn't just pull this out of his butt. It's in the Lotus Sutra. It's just that by the 13th century, human minds, Nichiren's mind of study and scholarship, was able to perceive this for what it is. It went, oh, ding, it's been here all along, right? All right. My computer seems to be skipping around and not liking this, so I'm going to end this first part here. That's the Lotus Sutra now, and I'm going to go back to the Prajnaparamita because I want to show from the Pali how far the thought on right mind and meditation came, and then we'll go back to the Lotus Sutra, and then finally we'll read from Nichiren, and we'll see how he uses and ties all of this together. This is the linkage that I want to explore with you guys, so you understand how study works and how to make it best work for you and your practice. I so appreciate you guys listening to my ramblings. I hope I put enough information in them that you can connect the dots for yourself, and that pleases me greatly if that happens, and I hope it does. And if for some reason it doesn't, please comment and let me know so I can fix it. You'll only help me learn more. Thank you. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo.